Good afternoon, and welcome to the Abigail Adams Institute and our conversations with affiliates. This afternoon, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. David Franks, our senior research fellow here at the Abigail Adams Institute, and for the last couple of years, convener of our award-winning Great Conversation series. David, welcome.
Thank you very much, and hello.
So tell us a little bit about your role as the convener of the Great Conversation. What is that like?
Well, it's a dream position to be able to select or help to select passages of decisive importance for our lives, dealing with the question, how should we live? Reaching from the Epic of Gilgamesh all the way to Judith Butler, and it's an immense privilege in our day and age to have the resources of such a beautiful institution as the Abigail Adams Institute is, to bring to young minds especially, but to the general population, an earnest engagement with texts that are deeply moving, deeply engaging, and quite entertaining. And I think
That's right. Yeah.
it's a wonderful experience. I think it's incomparable, and I just feel so blessed to be able to have this chance to run a program like this.
Yeah. No, we're delighted to have you as our convener, David. I wanted to ask you. I often introduce you in that setting as a philosopher and a theologian, and maybe I want to invite you to say a little bit more about that. So, as a philosopher, how do you approach some of these great texts and great books? And then, as a theologian, how do you put on a different hat on? How does it work? What is the difference in approaches or thinking?
Right, that's a great question, and it gets to the heart of what those vocations mean. To be a philosopher and to be a theologian are distinct. I don't think it's as radical as say Leo Strauss puts the question, but there's a very real difference of being in the world that those two vocations signify. So, a theologian, I'm a Catholic theologian, I'm a pious believer, and trained in systematic and moral theology. And so the science of theology begins with the revealed articles of the faith. So it's deductive in that respect. So you've got the questions, as it were, answered. But what I found more and more as I live life and go through passages of life that try the resources that are within me, I find that the certitude that is the supposed territory of the theologian is beguiling and is dangerous. So, in the end, if a theologian is not a philosopher first, he or she is going to be a very bad theologian, because the first thing every human needs to be is a philosopher. That is, asking questions, asking always, what does this mean? Even if you have, as a believer believes, I've got the answer, I don't have it in a way that is fully grasped by me. So even if I say I know what God is as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Trinity, but that mystery is inexhaustible. So how do I, as a person who believes in that article of the faith, keep the mystery alive? Well, it's by being a philosopher who's always in wonder at a mystery that is incomprehensible here, and frankly, by faith we know it's also incomprehensible in eternity. So the philosopher is what always must live in each one of us if we're going to be fully human. And to do good theology or to live our lives well, we just always have to be very earnest about the questions we ask. And this is why Kierkegaard is one of my favorite thinkers, because here he really is a philosopher, even though some of his greatest works are explications of Scripture. When he was writing in his own name and not under pseudonyms, he's writing these immensely powerful descriptions of biblical passages. But he's always doing what the energy of his thought is, because he is first a philosopher. He's not a theologian. He's a man who's who's in love with the pursuit of the truth, in love with the mystery of being, in love with that which defeats our certitude. So that philosophical habit of adventuring is what I treasure most in my own life.
And tell us a little bit, David. Your graduate work, you did it here in Boston College.
Right.
Is that right?
That's correct.
But as you know, a lot of our audience is students, graduate students, but undergraduates in particular. Tell us a little bit more. You're a Swarthmore alum, small college over in the Philadelphia area. Is that right? Is this where you sort of caught the philosophic bug, or tell us a little bit more about your? When did you decide to study theology, for example, or formally? Yeah.
So the first time I woke up intellectually was, it began with an English teacher who introduced me to romantic literature, poetry especially, and that started me to be it awakened a lot in me. But what secured my path to lifelong learning was around my junior year of high school, I read Plato's Republic.
So it was high school, before college.
Yeah.
Awakening, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
On a plane to Taiwan, where I was born, for the first and only visit I've had back there, I was reading the Republic, and the allegory of the cave just it bowled me over, and I was hooked. I was hooked on the whole thing, just this life of the mind. And then I followed up with Augustine's Confessions, and that 1-2 punch. It made everything different. I just couldn't wait to learn more. I embarked on reading a list of the great books and so on. So when I got to Swarthmore, I came in as a devout Christian. I wasn't Catholic, but I was at the time. But I was a devout believer. I knew I was heading into a very hardcore kind of leftist place, even though I had already begun to awaken as a conservative in my political orientation. I was very moved by the anti-communist critique and the pro-life witness. So at Swarthmore, I knew I was going to some place that was different from my fundamental sensibilities, my piety above all, but I felt that that's where God wanted me to be. And in fact, there, I switched from English literature to the study of philosophy and had great teachers in continental philosophy. So that was something that really captivated me. The Frankfurt School too.
Was there a pivotal teacher or course?
Well, Richard Eldridge was who does great work in romantic philosophy, was very important. And then another very decisive course was by Richard Schuldenfrei on social political philosophy, and that actually was a very important experience for my conversion to Catholicism, because I was thinking, well, at the time I was being led into a kind of more skeptical stance towards modernity, and I thought, well, there's a lot here that's tied in with the Protestant principle. I've become much more sanguine about the modern project, and about Protestantism, even though I remain a devout Catholic. But that course was a serious pursuit of the question of how should we live and how should we live together. So, and that's always been my fundamental preoccupation as a philosopher.
And so, do you go straight to graduate school then, or how does it work? And why Boston College?
So, I did master's level work at Catholic University first in Washington, D.C. in continental philosophy, though I started to also study more of the ancients, even though in fact, I did a classical Greek minor in college, so I had the philosophical background and studied the Gorgias in particular. Going to Catholic University, you get the chance to do ancient, continental, but also medieval, of course. So it was a very wonderful experience. I went straight, I didn't finish the degree, I went straight into a PhD program in theology at Boston College. So
in theology.
In
so
theology.
What about that jump? That was natural for you?
It was.
What were the kind of questions that tipped you over, let's say, in that
Yep.
direction, not, let's say, more conventional philosophy or political theory or something
Right.
like that? Yeah.
The form that my social political questioning was taking and beginning grad studies in philosophy were eschatological. That is, they were very motivated by the sense of the kingdom and what a just society, a utopian society would look like, what it means for history to have a meaning. And so that eschatological orientation, which is it's a theological topic, but it was a way I was trying to translate it into philosophical terms. And Kant was very important for my thinking along those lines. So in that respect, there was a philosophical bridge to my theological studies. And I thought I would, I applied to both philosophical, well, I applied mostly to philosophy programs from Catholic University, but I thought, well, this theology program looks like it might be also worth pursuing, and I wrote.
They have excellent philosophy too.
They do,
Yeah.
in fact. They do have an excellent.
So I interrupted you. You were going to say.
So it was writing my statement of purpose for that theology program that I realized, well, in the end, I really want to pursue the theological questions, and I think that was important as part of my personal growth, because my being received into the Catholic Church was a way of finding a community finally, and I've had to work out since then a lot of there's growing pains in being part of a community that can be very, can provide its own world that might separate you from the concerns that the rest of the world feels. So over the years, I've come to find that the reawakening of philosophical eros was essential to living my Catholicism well and to being a good theologian. So that's the general trajectory.
And maybe one other sort of academic question. You wrote on Balthasar, is that right?
Yes.
This is your dissertation and your
So
early mature work, as it were.
Right.
Yeah.
So I love the Swiss theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar, and his master work is a multi-volume meditation on the good, the true, and the beautiful. That section on the good is called the theodrama, so he's developing an extended analogy between human action in history and the theater. And that pulled together a lot of my interests from my English literature days and my continuing literary proclivities, including the poetry I write. And Balthasar wasn't an academic theologian. He had his credentials in German literature and thought, and that sensibility is definitely my own sensibility.
Great. David, so one last question for our budding philosophers and theologians. Can you recommend a book or two for their formation?
You really cannot beat the Republic of Plato. I mean, that's where I began, and I think that's the great question of justice, the great question of waking up to reality. It's still, I haven't had an experience quite like that since, even though the thing is, once you're on that path to trying to find what is so, everything lights up, everything, not just books, but even though then you find immense pleasure in books, but just life. You're looking around and you're saying, there's something going on here that's not mundane or trivial. There's something earnest and existential and eternal at stake in our everyday lives, and so you can't really do better. But there's all kinds of books. The Brothers Karamazov of Dostoevsky, that'll move you, because anything in the end, that book is important, because anything that's going to matter. I know this as a teacher, or someone who would like to be an evangelist. If I'm trying to reach someone, I have to reach from my own experience of suffering and touch that other person's experience of suffering. Dostoevsky understands that, and he really presents it in a way that's as powerful as anybody's. So that's another essential experience. I would also like to say, I should have said this about the great conversation. That unique experience we have here at the Abigail Adams Institute, it wouldn't be possible without the generosity of the donors that are so gracious in supporting this project. And it goes against the tenor of the times to support an initiative like this, and it takes real spiritual foresight and courage to do so. And so I want to thank the donors for what they do for us, because it really is something beyond the normal way of the world to have this. I think of it as an intellectual and spiritual paradise. So.
Well, David, that's very generous. Thank you so much for your words.